Hi, everybody. Welcome to Conversations with Calvin, We the Species. Uh, we're looking at a scenery with Bernd Haber. Behind him is Arizona, and one of my favorite places on earth. I just told Bernd I've been to Sedona, Arizona 12 times, climbing the mountains and the vortex and absorbing special energies through the soles of my bare feet.
Mhm.
It's a wonderful place. But this hey, there are interviews and interviews and interviews. This to me is so hugely special because it's so hugely unique. Because Bernd wrote a book about Fritz Haber, The Complete Diary, 16 months in an American POW camp. And the twist is his grandfather, Fritz Haber, was a German soldier in 1931. This is so interesting. I mean, this is so interesting, especially for me, from my perspective, my background, my and as it just all burnt, and there's so much I'm trying to spit out here. As it just all burnt, this kind of book, this kind of story is almost never told. The perspective from a German soldier. We have all our perspectives, and I'm a bit of a student of World War II for all kinds of reasons. But this is so unique because Fritz, back in the 30s, as Hitler was coming to power, was an avowed loyal communist. And Germany had certain dislikes. German hierarchy had certain dislikes. On top of the list were Jews, and second were communists. So Fritz did everything he could to kind of tell people the Hitler regime was bad stuff. And then when he just couldn't hold out anymore, he had to go into the Wehrmacht and served as a German soldier, and then was captured and spent 16 months in an American POW camp. And while he was there, he writes this eloquent diary. And that's what Burnt you've captured in Fritz Haber, The Complete Diary. So you've captured this a whole different perspective, something that I've never encountered on my journeys. And you're going to give your background, but you're born, you're born in East Berlin. And
Mhm.
you're there, and you saw the wall come down in '89, and then you went to Phoenix. So this is so unique and fascinating because it just never entered my realm to consider. A lot of that stuff gets buried. The Germany wanted to bury those things for a long, long time, and maybe it's part of the healing process to talk about this stuff. But I think the journey of Fritz Haber and his words and his diary is quite amazing, and we can talk a little bit about I mean, so many questions they ask. So anyway, I'm done with this monologue just to set up. Maybe, Bernd, if you could just do a little bit of a background of yourself, and then we're going to talk about Fritz Haber and his diary. Take it away.
Well, thank you so much, Calvin. Thanks for inviting me, and I feel very honored to be on your show and then have the conversation about this diary about my grandfather. But allow me, yeah, to introduce myself first. So Bernd Haber, born in East Berlin, East Germany. So a lot of the listeners or viewers know that there used to be two Germanys after World War II. There was East Germany and West Germany. And until 1989, when the Berlin Wall came down, that opened for me basically the rest of the other world to explore for me. I was actually lucky. I just had finished college, so the world opened up. And long story short, I ended up in Phoenix, Arizona. And I've been living here in Arizona for almost 30 years now. Came here in 1996, met my wife, have a daughter, so started family. With respect to my background, also, it is for me very beneficial to have lived or live now in two different systems. So if you, well, we always say communism, socialism. So whatever that means for people, maybe it's a bad thing, it's a good thing. But, you know, having lived through this, so the experience of the good and the bad things, but now for more than 35 years having lived in the capitalist system in comparison. So that's something for me I really appreciate in terms of also my own, you know, being or history. But then, of course, when I came across the diary of my grandfather, that just added a whole another dimension to it. One is, of course, a communist who, and I'll go into more details later, a communist who ends up serving in Hitler's Wehrmacht. And luckily, of course, he survived. And luckily for all of us, he sat down and wrote it all down in 100 pages. And luckily for me, eventually I got a hold of it. In 2020, my dad, when I visited him in Berlin, he said, "Oh, Bernd, I have this diary for you.
Wow.
Do you want it?" I said, "Hello, yes, of course, I'll take it." But I knew about the diary. And so the part of the story is in 1990, so right 1 year after the wall came down, I had the opportunity to sit down with my grandfather, Fritz, for 3 hours and recorded an interview with him. I wanted to know everything about our family, my uncles, my dad, you name it. So I asked him all these questions. And at that point in time, he showed me the diary, the original diary, saying, "Hey, I have this here. Would you like to read it?" So, of course. So I had it for a few months, but I had to give it back. And then it disappeared for another 20 some years.
Wow.
So I knew when my dad handed it over to me that it existed, and I had read it, but of course, not to the full extent. And I took it back with me to Phoenix, Arizona in 2020 and said, "What should I do with this? Tell the world, or, you know, just show it to family and friends?" So yeah, I decided to publish it, and it took about 4 years to get it ready with a foreword by someone famous. Also in the format as it is, finding a publisher, as we all know, it's typically the hardest part. But also get it translated, because it was written in German. So get it professionally translated, so it's really, you know, appealing to someone who speaks English versus German. So yeah, that's quite a journey.
Quite a journey. Quite a journey. It's funny. I mentioned this to you. You know, we're talking about you know, the language, and when I transferred to Rutgers, I was in pre-med, pre-pharmacy, and the they required a German language if you were to continue when you wanted to go on to medical school or pharmacy school. They wanted a German language, so I had to take German. And as it turned out, it became my best course at Rutgers. After a couple of little roadblocks, it became I got a you know, 2 A's in German because I have some, I guess, German background. But anyway, so um, this is I'm telling you, this is, for me, this is just so fascinating. It's so interesting. So you just kind of mentioned how this POW diary project came about. How well did you know your grandfather? Um,
I knew him very well until, so he passed away in 1998. So I knew him very well because not every year, but when I was in school way back in the 80s and 70s, I traveled to his hometown, Zwickau, in Saxony quite often, at least once a year, to visit also my grandma on my mother's side, spend a week or two, and I always visited him. My aunt and my cousins live nearby, so there was always a good reason to stop by for whatever reason. Maybe it's just a day. So I knew him very well, and he knew me as well. But it's not that we had a, you know, very intense relationship, a lot of exchanges of, but every time we met, so we, you know, like a family. I'm the grandson of him, so one of the grandsons. So yeah, you know, that was probably the extent to how I knew him. But then when we sat down in 1990, I learned quite a bit about him, of course, his own life, because he
right.
shared it with me. It's a 3 hour recorded interview, but I also learned quite a bit about my cousins, my brother, my dad.
You had a big family. Your grandfather had 6 kids, right?
Yes, correct. In the end, it was seven. So after the World War II ended, there was
Okay.
seven kid. But yeah,
Big family.
Big family. Yeah.
Yep.
My father was the oldest son.
Okay. Your
Yeah.
father was Herbert.
Herbert, correct.
See, I did my homework. I do my due diligence as a
Good.
journalist. I try to do my homework.
Mhm.
Uh, in looking at my notes, what is for you? There was a one-liner
Mm.
that you talk about that captures the spirit of this book.
Yeah.
So, what is that one-liner?
Yeah, if you don't mind, I read from the back of the book. That's so in his
Yes, read it.
the whole diary starts with this letter to his wife. She eventually got it, but basically he says, "I dedicate these pages to my wife and my children, of whom I hope are still alive and whom to find well when I return from captivity. May these lines serve my wife in the future as a compensation for the long time during which she knew nothing about my well-being, and for the children," and here's the one-liner, "to serve as an example of how human destinies can get easily mixed up." So
Wow.
that mix up. So based on your circumstances, things
Wow.
happen and you have to deal with them. Sometimes you can steer them a certain way, but in his case, yeah, serving in the Wehrmacht, he had no choice. And I can elaborate a little bit more on that.
Well, why don't you just kind of say some?
Oh, yeah, of course.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, he had to do something he didn't want to do. He had no choice. And listen, I think that's probably age old. I mean, I came out of the Vietnam era, and
Hmm.
and there are armies of, I use the word term loosely, armies of people, young people, mostly guys, who did not want to go into a war,
Yeah.
that they didn't really understand what was even being fought for. So,
Hmm.
but yeah, if you could elaborate a little bit on that.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'll go back in his life's history a little bit. So he was born in 1910. If you look, and that was also one of the things I learned quite a bit. I realized later when I was working on the project. So he was born in 1910. So who was in charge of in Germany was an emperor, was still an empire. So then World War One comes. So he's a toddler, little kid, doesn't realize what's going on, but there's World War One. So Germany or Europe goes through World War One, loses, 2018, and then the Weimar Republic starts in the 20s, as we all know about somehow culturally or musically, and with all the challenges that came, and then of course the rise of Hitler. So in 1933, Hitler, takes reign, and then for the next 12 years, we all know that history. So he lives through that. Then 1945, World War II ends, and then he goes back. Luckily, he survives the camp, goes back to his family in Zwickau, which then became the zone of the Russians, where the Russian had occupied. So he starts living his life in East Germany, 1949, Western East Germany. So he continues to live through the communist regime, so to speak, until 1989, and then of course 1990, the reunification of Germany. So he lives through all these stages of German history. It's just fascinating by
Yeah,
itself. I
yeah.
cannot tell necessarily what his feelings or thoughts were about the reunification or other things, but I know a few things based on the, of course, diary. So there's his life kind of, in a sense, predetermined. But what really influenced him were his two brothers, older brothers, Kurt and Otto. So in the 1920s, they had already joined the communist movement, protesting, demonstrating, do all kinds of things, what they did in the 1920s, fighting perhaps the Nazis, in the pub and also. But they encouraged him to join them. So he was the younger brother, and then he joined them at the end of the 1920s after he did his apprenticeship as a blacksmith. And so he joined them in 1930s. And so then in the early 1930s, he gets incarcerated by the Gestapo and put into, I kid you not, and there's proof, into a concentration camp. So the prison in Zwickau, there was the castle, that was the, the prison, so to speak, but was officially labeled as a concentration camp. So he spent 1 year in a prison because they actually wanted to get his brother, who had fled the scene, basically. But the concentration camp was not yet the killing machine that we know of later on, right? So he had got this experience with the new regime, and of course that kept him going. I need to find a way to survive because I have family, I have kids, and then eventually in 1941, I believe, so he gets called to serve in the Wehrmacht. No choice. His employer actually for many rounds they tried. No, he's so important. He's one of the employees who do magic. We cannot let him go. But eventually, of course, they had to let them go. So in this, going back to the original point, so he had no choice. Otherwise, they would have said, okay, if you don't want to serve, back to the camp, or even worse.
Wow. Wow. That must have been so hard
Mm-hmm.
to be forced into something that you just didn't believe in. Oof.
Yeah.
Um, why did you I mean, obviously this is written in this is written in German, of course. Why did you want to publish it in English here in the United States?
So my thought initially, I thought was, yeah, let's publish in Germany because it's written in German. Find a publisher, off we go. But there might not have been much of an interest of maybe there's so many books or so much literature about World War II, and then there's another one saying, okay. So, but also because I live in the United States, I have been living in the United States for the last almost 30 years now. So I thought maybe that it might be interesting much more interesting to an American audience, so students of history, or just people who like a real good story of perseverance or whatever the motivation would be to, read this book. Um, because, and Calvin, right? So most Americans, if they are interested in history or German history, World War II, they know about few things about World War II. It's, of course, Holocaust is perhaps D-Day, Hitler, of course, and all his henchmen, the names maybe, concentration camps, the Nuremberg tribunal trials, if they go that far. There's a few facts. Okay, yeah, but that's pretty much it. What they know about World War II. It was bad, and all of that. So here comes a documentation that from the common German, here's how I look at the world. Having grown up in the 1920s, early 1930s, having already a good sense of how the world works, through his brothers, his parents. So already been aware of, there's socialism, there's communism, there's now fascism. So from that perspective, that gives them also the strength to survive eventually. So having someone telling that story from that perspective. And in the diary, he goes back in time and also comments on why the war happened, what happened to us, and so on. So it's not just this personal story of perseverance and survival, it's also presenting a bigger picture of someone who was aware of it.
Okay. While you're when you're reading and you're learning about your grandfather's diary, did anything in particular surprise you when you're, doing this? Did
Yeah,
you?
certain anecdotes that came out of the book, but also in connection with the interview that I conducted in 1990. So I can maybe share one anecdote, if you don't mind.
Yes, yes, yes.
Is how when he ended up in in the POW camp, American camp in Metz in France, so not in the US but in France, he managed to send a letter back home eventually, and coincidence had it at one point in time there was an American journalist who was at the camp reporting about the conditions, and he talked to him saying, "Hey, could you take this letter to one priest near Munich in this one small town, because you're traveling to Munich, right? So go to the small town, find the priest, give him a letter. He knows me very well because I served nearby, and let him send the letter home to my family in Zwickau." So, but imagine this is 1945, everything is destroyed. So good luck. So he did. But the letter arrived at home, and luckily, eventually, then they knew he's alive, he's okay, but he's in his camp. So there's an address. So the family, his wife, and my father actually contributed to it, sent a letter back to him, and then eventually he found out that they're still alive, everything is okay. In the letter, and that's the anecdote. In the letter, my dad asks him a question. Hey, Dad, I'm 15 years old now. I have to make a decision what I want to be in life. And there's probably three choices. I want you to help me make that decision. Okay. First one is miner. Zwickau is very famous for light coal. His brothers and his uncles were already miners. Okay. Second, my teacher in school tells me I'm really good at acting, stage plays at the school. Maybe I should become an actor. Or I'm someone at this new news agency here, where work for them, write little articles. They tell me I'm pretty good with language, so maybe I should become a journalist. So he gets this letter, and he was very strong about in his response, Fritz, to his son, Herbert, my father, saying, "Minor, absolutely not. No. Stage play actor, heck no. Go for the journalist." So he did.
Wow.
And then eventually my father, that started his career becoming a journalist, but then ended up in East Berlin at the Politburo of the Communist Party because of all of this, talent. In 2020, I went to Berlin to visit my dad in January. I was a few weeks before he passed away. And when he gave me the diary and I told him about also the letter, my dad said, "Oh, yeah, I remember. I wrote something in that letter, but I totally forgot what it was." So I told him the whole story. So you asked your dad what you should become, and that shaped your life. And then he sat down and cried, my dad, when I told him that. So it was just closing that loop for him. It was just fantastic.
Wow. I'm curious about this, because I've seen just about every. I watched the movie Stalag 17 once every 4 months. About a German POW camp. Americans and British are there. I watch The Great Escape all the time. I watched. That's predominantly the essence of the movies that I watch, From Here to Eternity. So, but I never got this perspective. What was it like? What you were able to take from here? What was it like for Fritz to be a German POW? What was it like in a POW camp, an American POW camp?
Yeah, if you don't mind, I go back to the day when he was captured. I believe April 28, 29, 1945. So he was serving near Munich in this searchlight unit, the big searchlight for airplanes to find them in the sky. So he was near Munich, a small village. So that day, that morning or the night before, they realized the American tanks are rolling in on the upper side of the village, coming down the hill. And so they knew that's the end, and they're still waiting for some orders, what to do, shoot or give up. So basically, the small unit, they decided, no, we're not going to fight because we're not going to survive this. So they had the white flag ready. And my grandfather decided, I'm not going to hide. I'm wearing my uniform, so they know I'm a soldier. But what he did, it's hard to believe, but he did say, hey, he went to the local farmer saying, you have some eggs, we have some meat. Let's have a good breakfast, because if they capture us, we don't know what's going to happen. So he made breakfast with pancakes, fresh eggs for everyone. And then, I kid you not, but you have to read the book to find the exact spot. Then one of his fellow soldiers and him, they are hiding 80 bottles of schnapps nearby in the woods. So there's this, I have no idea whether they're still there or not. So if someone is like a treasure hunter, maybe read the book and find those. That would be awesome. Just call me when you find them. But think about it, the situation, you don't know if you survive the next few hours, right? So then, of course, he gets captured by the Americans, very fair. And then they put him on trucks and trains eventually, and they go from place to place. There's places where they count, take your information, all that. So eventually, after a journey of few weeks, he ends up in this camp in Metz in France. And in each of these stations where they get to, the conditions were, of course, pretty bad because, first of all, thousands of soldiers, right? So of course, even for the Americans, it was hard to deal with what enough food. We need to feed them and all of that. So he went through almost not getting water for days, no food, but he was clever enough to always find a fellow soldier. Either they knew each other or someone whom he could trust. Said, let's work on this together. You get the food, I get the water. We have a little bit cardboard, so we're not freezing. So it's April, May, so it's still cold to get some form of blanket during the night. So this way, the conditions were really bad. Eventually, in Metz, it got better and better. But for him to just figure this out again, those are what did he say? The example of human destinies get easily mixed up. So I'm in this situation, still have hope to survive, but that's all I have to focus on. Survive, survive, survive. So yeah, the conditions were pretty bad. One of the interesting aspects he writes about a lot in the diary at various stations or camps that he ended up with is how the German soldiers treated each other. There's the soldier and there's the officers and there's the generals all there. And actually the Americans and everyone who ran the camp, they always said, well, we need to keep the same hierarchy in place because we cannot give orders. So the former generals and officers still gave the orders what to do. And some soldiers just, what? Why do we have to follow orders? So this whole dynamic among the soldiers or all the ranks of the Wehrmacht soldiers in captivity, it's a very interesting aspect of the whole diary.
Okay. Yeah, I was just curious about, like I said at the outset, I've seen, Americans in German POW camp, but I never. So this is again interesting because he's writing about being an American,
Mm-hmm.
and that adds to the mystique of this book. In my notes, there's something about a shooting squad.
Mm.
Can you talk about that in the diary?
Love to, yeah. So there's the diary, the original diary that I have, of course. And in the diary, he just mentioned that maybe half a page, a reference to that shooting squad. But I have additional documentation outside of the diary where he writes in more detail what happened. So you have to imagine I think it was January or February of 1945. So it's winter, it's a few weeks away from the end of the war. Everyone pretty much, unless you really, totally believe in it, I knew we're close to the end. So one day his commanding officers asked him to come to his office and close the door. I got an order here. You need to follow. 2 days from now, you have to report to, it's called the field court with an Feldgericht. So that's the German word. Feldgericht means a field court. It's a court-martial place, a local mobile court. So, military court. And you have to report because someone probably snitched on you. He had said something bad about the war. So, but, you have to go. It's an order. And so just imagine this, because most of the time when you ended up being in front of a field, and they're real judges, military judges, right? When you get in front of these judges, at that time, it means basically that's the end of your life. They would say, well, you charge this, treason, boom, shoot, done. I have to apologize, Calvin. I'm talking about a different anecdote. You asked about the squad.
Yes, it's fine. You know what? It's all
I
information.
just realized that. I apologize.
No, it's fine. It's absolutely fine. Before we go on, I just want to go off topic.
Yes.
There's a couple of questions I always like to ask. So here goes. You can answer one or two, three, whatever. So, excluding family or friends, somebody living or dead, you'd like to spend a day with.
Well, I have to switch over to music.
Go
That's
right ahead.
His name is Paul McCartney. And the reason why I'm pointing to Paul McCartney, because tomorrow is his birthday and tomorrow's my birthday. So I always wanted to celebrate with Paul. Tried several attempts, so far not successful.
Well, that's great. That's a great answer. That's a wonderful answer. Hey, I grew up to that stuff. Paul McCartney. I mean, I just grew up to that. It's funny. There was a, Brian Wilson had passed away
Hmm.
recently, and of course, I also want you to talk about Worldstrings Promotion, what you're doing. And
Hmm.
again, that's a little off topic, but Paul McCartney said about Brian Wilson that the song "God Only Knows" may be the greatest written song ever, and even saying it's better than "Yesterday" and all this stuff that
Hmm.
he wrote. Um, another quick question: do you have any favorite movies?
Ooh. Well, I'll go back to recent movie history. I'm a big fan of Babylon Berlin, that series that came out a few years ago. I believe there's 5 seasons out there. I've watched 3 because in the US only you could at this point watch 3 seasons. So I'm a big fan because it's also a very personal story. All the various characters in the plot, telling a historical story, the end of the 1920s in Berlin or Cologne, leading to, of course, the 1930s. Then, yes, that's one of my favorites. Yeah.
Okay. Uh, Again, another little off topic. You have a music agency, World Strings Promotion, and I love what you say about your mission uh, um, to keep bringing people together through the power of music.
Hmm.
How did you get into? Because you got a master's degree, I think, in mechanical engineering.
That is correct. So yeah, but during my college time in Saxony, actually, I went to the same place for my college. Yeah, I got that degree, but during the college time, I became a member of a music group, folk music, German traditional songs we played, performed, children's songs, all kinds of occasions. So I got into music as a music artist. And so when I came to Phoenix in 1996, I thought I could make a career because if you think about it, right, as an East German before the wall came down, the big dream was one day I'm gonna make it big in the United States and America as a musician, right? So when I came to Phoenix, Arizona, I started a career as a musician, performed at folk festivals, local coffee houses, and venues. But then in 2002, I realized it's not my career. I'm not the next, Bruce Springsteen or Bob Dylan, of course. So I decided to take on the music business. So I organized a tour of 3 German singer-songwriters, 3 singer-songwriters from Arizona. We sent them on tour 2003 in Germany, 2004 in the United States, East Coast, played at Kennedy Center,
Wow.
and 2005 back. Part of that was someone knew Pete Seeger. I hope everyone knows who's listening who Pete Seeger is. I don't have to explain. But I got in contact with Pete, but it's a very long story. But I got in contact with him. I sent him letters and information. And at one point in time, he sends back, and he used to send little postcards back to everyone who writes him a letter or gives him information. And he always sends it off with old Pete and with the banjo. So it's his signature. And the first postcard I got back from him said, "Thank you for the pictures and the information you sent me. Keep bringing people together." So that was kind of the call.
Yeah.
Say maybe not maybe that's the mission I want to be using for. So I wrote a letter back to Pete saying, "Pete, may I use this for as an endorsement for my music business and for the tour?" 3 months later comes another postcard. "Yes, Bernd, you can keep use this quote, keep on hastily." So ever since, and I just added the words through the power of music.
Great. That's great. Okay, back to work. You
Yes,
have a foreword written by an interesting man, and I may be pronouncing his name wrong, Bjorn Krondorfer.
correct.
How
Mhm.
did he come to write the foreword?
So it goes back to 2020 in January. He has a very similar story. His father was a member of the Wehrmacht. He was serving as a guard in Poland, near, not at, but near a concentration camp, one of those camps. But he was aware what's going on.
He
So, but
was.
of course, he survived. And for years, his son, Björn, also born German, tried his dad to speak about it, write about it. And for years, his dad would not talk about it, whatever. in the late 90s, finally, he opened up, his dad, and he said, well, let's travel together to the places where you've been. And if you don't mind, I would like to record. I'll ask you questions and want to, your answers recorded. And that turned into a book, similar to this diary.
Okay.
And in 2020, Bjorn, was presenting at an event here in Phoenix about his father and the book. So I met him and introduced myself and said, well, I have a similar book, Diary of My Grandfather, I'm about to publish. Can I keep you in a loop, basically? So then eventually, throughout the progression of the project, I kept him in a loop. And then eventually, he also became my mentor in terms of also some of the perspectives, how to frame it in the forward or in my introduction. And then I asked him to write the forward, and he said, I'd be honored. So he did. Yes.
That's neat. Neat. So far, what has been the reaction? I know, listen, I'm thrilled about this because it's so unique. So what has been, the reaction so far to, the publishing of the book?
The reaction is very positive in terms of also the insight of a common person looking at world history, basically. And it's interesting, the first round of people that I introduced the book when it came out last year was the book club of my wife. So she's a member of the book club. So they became book of the month in June of last year. And then we sat together and they all said, well, it's just an astounding story. So similar to what you said, Calvin, is a very unique perspective on a world history piece or event. But it's also about the perseverance of someone who knows maybe tomorrow's my last day, the hope, the faith in your own ability to survive, but also the hope to see your family again. So, and then all the aspects that come with it. So that's the most of the people that come back to me saying, those are the things that really impress me, including, of course, your grandfather having a knowledge of what's going on. It's not just, I'm just a small person, I have no idea, I've tried to survive, which is already a story enough, but having that perspective. So yeah, most of the people who come back, talk about that part of the diary. One person, and which is I'm very happy about, is also came back. He's a veteran, US veteran. So he served in the Vietnam War. And he came back to me saying, after reading the book, there's so many parallels for me. I mean, he never ended up in a POW camp, but so many parallels about the war, hierarchy, officers, the dynamics among soldiers. And then we talked for hours. He shared with me his stories that he experienced during the Vietnam War. So that was a very unique perspective on the diary.
Okay. Who would you like to read the book? Who would you like? Is there a specific category of people you'd like to? I mean, I would think this is just general reading for such a wide audience, because it's history. It's
Yeah.
history.
Of course, yeah. Anyone who's interested in history itself, military history or world history, or specifically German history, of course, yeah, please. But then also, yeah, maybe young people who try to figure out what to do with life. So maybe they're still in their high school years or college years. And so what's out there? And be aware that there's moments that can happen, whether you call it serendipity or coincidence, when you have to deal with something that you may not have planned for. So from that, and what you do about and how you keep yourself together in a sense with maybe humor. Fritz was also quite funny in certain circumstances. So yeah, young people primarily, and anyone who really believes in, if I have the strength as a person, I can survive, have faith in something, hold on to something, I can make it. Yeah, to your point, pretty much
Okay.
quite a range
Yeah.
of an.
Yeah,
Yes.
I would think a wide audience. I always like to listen. I always do a little plug. There's a tortoise in my hair, a journey to spirit, which you were so kind to get. Uh,
Mhm.
and as a writer, we're both writers, and you've written a few things. And when I'm done asking my question, you can talk about some of the. You wrote an interesting book about Flake and McCain. They were your uh, senators here in Arizona, and you wrote a book because I guess you wrote them letters and you got back letters. You can talk
Correct.
about that in a second. But
Mhm.
uh, uh, do you ever think about this being made into a movie?
Yes, and
Okay.
I'm working on it. Not yet successful yet, so no one has come back saying, "Here's, $20 million for turning this into a movie project." So I can give you. So the answer is yes. And my pitch to anyone who's would be interested in working with me on this is whoever plays my grandfather in a leading role will win the Oscar. Period. I know it's a little ambitious, but so I can give you an example. I mentioned Babylon Berlin. So there's the main character. I have to look up the name of the actor who plays this policeman, who is one of the central characters. Last year, actually, I sent a nice letter to him, to his agency in Berlin, with a book and said, "Hey, the way you play this role, I can easily imagine you could play my grandfather." I have not heard back, but you never know. Maybe one day, maybe next week comes.
You never know. You never know. It's funny. About a half hour before we went on air, I read a little article about the movie The Pianist,
Hmm.
about Spielman. His name, I guess, Spielman, and I guess the director and all the powers that be wanted. I forgot who they wanted to play the lead role. It wasn't Adrian Brody.
Hmm.
It was somebody else who was busy. He had signed on to do another movie, so they kind of stumbled on Adrian Brody, I guess, who won the Academy Award for that.
There
Uh,
you go. Yes. Hmm.
so you never know. Do I think about that? Hey, sometimes I do. It's funny. I just got thrown at me a story about World War II.
Hmm.
Um, uh, I won't mention names, but there was a soldier who worked his way up really, true story.
Hmm.
A soldier who worked his way really, he achieved a rank that it takes like 16 years to get, and he did it in 3 years. And when he blinked his eye, all of a sudden he was Eisenhower's chief aide
Hmm.
and
Wow.
carrying around all these uh, secret documents, especially about D-Day and all that other stuff.
Hmm.
And um, and then was in the White House when Eisenhower got elected. But the funny thing about it, the guy was not who he everybody thought he was. He was somebody else.
Hmm. Like
Yeah.
an agent or a secret agent?
No, it wasn't a secret agent. He just he changed his identity so he could blend in.
I see.
And so they sent me the notes and they want me to write a treatise about that. And it's slapping me in the face. What a movie! I mean, here's a guy.
Good story. Yeah.
They made a couple of I forgot. I don't know if it was Tom Hanks. Somebody. Tony Curtis was in a movie before your time, I think in the 60s, called The Great Imposter. He played a real person, I think from Massachusetts, who kept changing his identity and did a million different things, everybody thinking he's. And then there was another movie, more recent. I don't know if Tom Hanks was in it, but somebody also who, but these were, The Great Imposter was a true story. This may have been fiction, but this story that landed in my lap here is very much a true story that's buried. It's buried for whatever kind of reasons. It's not, it's not high security stuff.
Yeah.
It's just buried. There
It's
was
compelling. Yes, definitely.
so it was making me think about the question I just asked you about turning this into a movie. Um, Winding down. Um, uh, well, you've got a couple of books under your belt, right? This is your third.
That's my fourth.
Okay,
Yes.
your fourth.
So yeah, I can talk about the McCain and Flake,
Sure.
Jeff Flake and John McCain.
Uh-huh.
So two Republican senators in Arizona a few years back, of course. So between 2014 and 2018, I felt compelled, and there's many reasons for it. I felt compelled sending them letters, but real letters. Initially, really a letter to the office, and I would get a letter back, really, the real letters. And eventually ended up exchanging emails. But I sent to them 62 letters over the span of the 4 years, addressing various aspects of what's going on in the country, politically, economically, and also Arizona. And I received 22 responses mostly from John McCain, some from Jeff Flake. And I thought, oh, that's an interesting reference to an exchange like this. And so I turned it into a book and put it into a certain context. Also has to do with my dad, his history, the responsibility of politicians in power. So, because when they make decisions, it could impact a lot of people. So I put it into kind of that frame and published them, self-published those 62 letters plus the 22 responses. And as we all know, when you send something to a senator or someone official, typically you get a letter back that's written by somebody, the talking points kind of, and saying, yeah, okay. But only once I get a letter back an email back from John McCain. There was, if you may recall, when the decision was made late at night about Obamacare, whether to skip it or not, and he, did this.
Yes.
I sent him a very letter, may not agree with everything you do or say, but you did something as a statesman.
Correct.
So then one letter and thank you very much, Bernd. Your comment means or meant a lot to me. That was it. So there was one personal reference. So
okay, interesting. Who would ever think to do that? And in fact, he got responses.
yes.
It's funny. I wrote Senator Booker a couple of things. I met him like 6 times. I never heard. Listen, I wrote a lot of letters. I've written a lot of letters to a lot of different people. The only one I ever got I actually got a letter back, was from Lin Manuel Miranda. The producer. He actually wrote me a handwritten note when I wrote him a letter. I asked him to come on the show. So, but in the real world, sometimes these things do happen. So, but that's great what you did with that. Finally, Bernd, any events that are coming up with relation to the book, and where can people get the book?
So yeah, there's two pieces coming up. One is on October 7th, 2025, this year. I'm invited by the Harold Corman U.S. Military Veterans Club. So that goes back to the reference. So through family connections, I was introduced to the head of this club. And I asked, saying, would that be something to present to U.S. veterans, Vietnam veterans, or, other wars? And they said, absolutely, let's have a conversation. So I'm really curious about that event, talking to, U.S. veterans in the context of my grandfather's story. That's coming up on October 7th. And then the Phoenix Public Library, they had invited anyone who published the book over the last year here in Arizona to see if you could become an Arizona author for the next year. So there's still hope. In July, they decide. I, of course, submitted this story. We'll see if I could become, Arizona author with other authors as well. Where you can buy the book at Amazon, you can find it. You can first, if you want, go to the website. Maybe I'll hold up the sign. That's okay.
Yes, please.
So it's 16 months as POW, one word.com.
Okay.
So you'll find a link there to Amazon, or you search it on Amazon. But since this is the first edition, I'm happy. Reach out to me through email, and you can order it directly from me. I'll sign it, because you never know. And signed first edition may become, something worthwhile.
Sure. Hey, this has been great. I'm so glad. The connections in the universe, however it works, that we had gotten together, because you kind of lit me up here to think about things that I would have never thought about, and nothing would have ever crossed my frame of reference or my sight to even consider this. And again, I've seen the endless amounts of World War II, and even as a kid, even as a kid, a young teenager, I read The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich by William L. Shirer,
Yeah.
because I was fascinated for personal reasons. It involved my life and my family. So even as a young teenager, I'm reading that kind of stuff. So but in all these years, these decades, decades and decades for me, I've never encountered this perspective before, and it's a real perspective. So I'm again, I'm thrilled about this, and this time we spent was great,
Mhm.
and I'm actually inviting you to come back. Talk
Oh,
about put together another chat. I mean, this is great stuff.
thank you.
Truly. So I thank you, and I'm going to stop recording. Don't leave. We'll do a 2-minute wrap.
Mhm.
That's a music term, I think.
Yes.
A 2-minute wrap.
Mhm.
But thank you so much, Bert, for your passion and your time. I greatly appreciate it.
Thank you, Calvin. Really appreciate it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.